Welcome to Politics for Happy People, where we have fun conversations about serious issues. I'm Joseph Backholm, as always, joined by Ashley Vaughn. And today on the program, the big story of the day is North Carolina came in 42nd out of 50 in religious freedom protections. Why are we so behind? We will tell you. But first, Ashley, we're going to assess our outrage.
Something even more important than religious liberty.
Something even more important than religious freedom is, of course, daylight savings time. And here's the thing, folks, here on Politics for Happy People, we're trying to figure out how happy, how upset should we be about the things that the internet is yelling about? And one of those right now is daylight savings. And Ashley, do you have strong opinions about this yet? Because I'm going to make you give us a number in a moment.
I wouldn't say strong opinions, but I have opinions. Yes.
Okay. So let's set the stage before we compare notes on this. How upset should you be? Because July 14th, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Sunshine Protection Act, right? And who doesn't love the Sunshine Protection Act? A bill to make daylight savings time permanent and end the twice yearly clock changes, which I will say is it's just a popular thing to complain about. Every time it happens, everybody moans and groans about it. Is it really that big of a deal? I don't know. But the Sunshine Protection Act passed with strong bipartisan support. A 308 vote majority now heads to the Senate. And the Senate will determine whether they can get 60 votes and put this into law and actually end daylight savings. Now, let's talk about the concerns here. Is in certain places, the sun will rise very late if this happens. Places like Seattle or Grand Rapids, the sun will not rise well into second period for a lot of school kids. Right? So we think about what's going on in the morning. We wake up, our kids wake up, everybody goes to school, and they're doing the whole morning ritual at home, have breakfast, get out the door, go to school, go to your locker, kind of all that routine. And it's totally dark until the middle of second period in several places in our country. And, up north, like North Dakota, that could happen for a couple few months. But people also are annoyed by time changes. Ashley, on a scale of 1 to 10, how upset would you be if they decided to do away with daylight savings change and we never change our clocks again?
I would not be upset. I would like it for the time to stay the same and to not change. And that's mostly being a mother of little children. Mm-hmm. You can change the clock, but that doesn't change their little bodies.
Right.
And they're still waking up at the same time, and they don't know that it's different. And it takes weeks. And
so you actually
we're talking about like what?
Like the idea of eliminating
yes.
savings.
Oh yes. Yes.
So you're like a 1 out of 10 in the upset scale because you're actually excited about it.
I can understand why some states would want to keep it this way. Maybe the states should decide.
Well,
because the more northern states, it's more of a problem for them, right?
It's different. And we know Arizona opted out a long time ago, right? Because you can't do that. And Arizona has been on the same time schedule for a long time, and they have more sun, certainly, than North Dakota. I actually don't think I like this.
Okay, why is
that? Not by a lot. I think I'm not. It's not going to change my life. Well, basically, I'm kind of falling back on the old adage that I've heard that you should not tear down a fence until you understand why it was put up in the first place. And my suspicion, just because of my beliefs about human nature, are that we like to complain about things, and this is something that you can complain about, right? But I'm a big fan of just remembering in all policy choices and basically all of life choices, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And daylight savings was something that we came up with in order to solve a problem that people felt at some point in the past, which is in significant parts of the country, the sun's not coming up until 9 o'clock.
Right.
Our kids don't wake up, all of those things. You express the challenge of the body clock does not know that daylight savings
Right.
time happens. And I've had young children as well. I now have older children, but that is true. And that is part of the challenge of twice a year, we're going to change the clocks. But what I think we are not aware of, because we haven't lived through that world, is the challenges associated with never changing the clock. And I think if we do this, I think within a couple years, everyone will start complaining because we're only familiar with the risks associated with the current choice. And we don't know anything about the costs associated with the other choice because we haven't lived through that. And we're going to complain either way because that's kind of what we do. But my guess is, and I'm just theorizing because my whole life has been in this we change the clock twice a year world, but I think we may end up regretting that choice should we make that choice. And it looks like we're going to.
Well, I think about it primarily as a mom. For myself, I don't know that it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I just sleep in a little bit longer, wake up a little
Yeah.
bit earlier. It does make me a little bit sad for the kids that have to wait for the bus in the dark longer in the northern states
Yeah.
because they have larger seasonal changes with daylight and all of that. And so I can see how like a countrywide policy change might not be the best.
Well, and to be fair, though this is the Sunshine Protection Act, we need to remember this does not actually change the amount of daylight you have. It just
Right.
changes the time at which the sun rises and sets for you.
But we're not going to change the start of school time.
Probably not, though who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows how communities and school districts might adapt to this. But the northern states will still have relatively few, 7, 8, 9 hours of daylight during the winter. The more southern states will always have more. It's just when does the sun rise and when does the sun set, and which do you prefer? So I don't think it's worth truly being outraged by either way, but I just think we are prone to complaining. And is it slightly inconvenient when the time changes? Yeah. And I appreciate your dilemma as a mother and trying to get your small kids doing that. But I think they might not like going to school in the dark all the time as well,
true.
which is
Good
just a
point.
different challenge. So I don't know. We'll see what they do, but my guess is we experience buyer's remorse if we do that. So on to the big story of the day, of the episode. North Carolina is 42nd in a report from from First Liberty Institute, based in Texas. A lot of good friends there. They have a Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, and they have been publishing a report since 2022 on the states and how they compare with respect to honoring and protecting religious freedom. In the 2026 version, North Carolina comes in 42nd. Ashley, did that number surprise you?
Very much.
Because?
Well, we're in the South, what's referred to by many as the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
We're not solidly red, but I would say lean red.
For sure.
There are lots
Recently.
there are lots of blue states that are beating us in the category of religious liberty in this ranking.
That's right. And I think I agree with you. This kind of surprised me because we see ourselves as somewhat conservative, but I think there's some things in here that help North Carolinians understand that we're kind of an anomaly in some important ways, and talk about why that is. And I want to go through this specific religious freedom protections that do not exist in North Carolina, that do exist in other places, that have given us the lower ranking than many may have expected. And the first is RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And this is something that we have tried to get into law here, and we have failed to do that. And RFRA, to be clear, is not actually a specific legal protection. It is a standard, and it requires the government to prove, and it applies something called strict scrutiny in the constitutional analysis of taking away civil liberties, it requires the government to prove if they do anything to restrict your religious freedom, like you can't say that thing, you can't go to that church you must close down, business, you must provide this service for this event that you don't like. If they do anything that restricts religious expression, the government must prove they are pursuing a compelling interest and they are doing it through the least restrictive means possible. And that is a standard that the Supreme Court has set up that's known as strict scrutiny, that if the government is going to restrict speech, restrict religious expression in some way, strict scrutiny is the highest standard that exists in the law. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was passed at the federal level, so this already applies with respect to federal actions. But the Supreme Court says that the federal RFRA does not restrict what governments can do. So if every state wants their own RFRA with respect to the state government action, they have to pass that themselves. We have not done that in North Carolina.
So to summarize, what you're saying is what the RFRA does is it says that the government has to have a really, really, really good reason to
compelling government interest. But
yes.
Yeah, it's legal speak for really, really,
yes.
really,
well,
really
I'm
good
not
reason.
an attorney, Joseph,
That's
so
right.
I have to convert
No,
it in my mind.
That's right. That's right.
They have to have a really, really, really good reason to take away any religious expression or religious freedom that you have, and they have to do it in a very gentle way, the least restrictive way.
The only way to accomplish the goal has to be the thing they have proposed.
Gotcha.
The least restrictive means. There can't be another way to accomplish that goal. Let me give you an example of how that works in a different context. The government has said that with respect to pornography regulations, they say that pornography is First Amendment. It's speech, therefore protected by the First Amendment. And I'm going to set aside the challenges of that for a moment for these purposes. Some states have attempted to regulate the promotion of pornography. And what the Supreme Court has said, that there is a compelling interest in protecting children from explicit material, but actually shutting down websites is not the least restrictive means of doing so, because you can put an internet filter on the on a home. They can install an internet filter that will block the content. That's less restrictive than shutting down the website. So that is how the courts have dealt with that. Now, that specific case is actually probably and hopefully going to be thrown on the proverbial ash heap of history, because it doesn't work in the real world with respect to pornography regulations. But I'm trying to explain what a least restrictive means kind of test is.
That makes sense. Okay, so we don't have this in North Carolina. We didn't pass RFRA here.
Correct.
Let me ask you a question, since you're an attorney.
Fire away.
Article 1, Section 13 of our state constitution says, all persons have a natural and inalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences, and no human authority shall, in any case whatever, control or interfere with the rights of conscience.
Yes, and that sounds like very strong language, right? And that is actually one of the objections, and I don't even know if objections is the right word. There are people who share our interest in protecting religious freedom in North Carolina who say we do not need a RFRA because of what you've just read. And if that is true, then the problem here is with the assessment, not with the legal standard.
The assessment of the ranking.
The ranking itself.
That was
and
done
we have
by
to be
this
open
group.
to that, right? And so has First Liberty fully taken into account what the North Carolina Constitution says about religious freedom and whether or not it actually already provides that language? I think it's a fair question, and there are some in the legislature who say that's why we don't need RFRA. So take that into account. I think that's worth considering in the rankings. So, but we do not have a RFRA. Is it going to be harmful? I don't think so. Is it necessary? Some would say maybe not, but that is we'll continue to have that conversation. But let's go to the second area, because there are others. There is no general conscience protection for healthcare providers in North Carolina. And that's something that many states have passed laws that basically explicitly allow doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and sometimes entire institutions to opt out of procedures that violate their conscience, and things like, of course, abortion, gender reassignment stuff related to hormones, all of those things. Sometimes it's like, vasectomies that Catholic people, because of their beliefs about, contraception, would not want to participate in. And North Carolina does not explicitly protect healthcare providers.
So without that protection in the law, any sort of case that comes up about that would be decided in the courts.
Well, any kind of case, I mean, it's
A
always
lawsuit.
going to be decided in the courts,
Sure.
yes. But yes, it's the question of what the standard is of, and again, we just talked about the constitutional protections that exist in our state constitution, which seem
Strong.
very robust.
Yes.
However, if the statute does not explicitly say healthcare providers cannot be compelled to provide services that violate their conscience, then it's left up to the court system to determine whether the constitutional language that you read actually allows a doctor not to dispense an abortifacient drug if they don't want to, or a pharmacist not to do that. So there's ambiguity, and then you have to go to court and try to assert the right that you believe the First Amendment or the state constitution gives you,
Right.
and hopefully the courts agree with you. But if there's a statute that explicitly says a pharmacist cannot be forced to do this, a nurse cannot be forced to do this, then there's less to argue about.
Another safeguard that's noted to be missing for North Carolina is the recusal of counseling providers. And this is the safeguard that protects counselors or therapists from being required to counsel or serve a client as to goals, outcomes, or behaviors that conflict with their sincerely held principles. This made me think of the Childs versus Salazar case that the Supreme Court decided, because Colorado actually passed this censorship law that forbid counselors from trying to help kids regain comfort with their biological sex.
Conversion therapy is the term.
And only
generally
allowed
used,
them
yes.
to encourage children towards gender transition.
Correct.
Which we know leads to harmful this social transitioning often leads to harmful drugs and other procedures. So the Supreme Court rightly said that these counseling conversations are speech, and that the states can't unfairly silence certain viewpoints in the counseling room. But this protection that is noted to be missing in North Carolina is states, I guess, positively saying that you can't require a counselor to speak a viewpoint that they either don't agree with or believe is harmful. Do we need that kind of protection after that Supreme Court case?
There's a decent argument to be made that you do not, because the Supreme Court has spoken to the question. But what the Supreme Court, maybe I'll actually disagree with what I just said, but the Supreme Court said that you cannot have a statute that compels
Right. It's different.
that counseling. What First Liberty Institute, through their index, would clearly like to have is a statute that explicitly says they cannot be compelled to do this, that counselors are free to
Kind
counsel.
of the opposite of what Colorado did.
Correct. They want the state legislature to affirmatively state the right of counselors to counsel in a way that is consistent with their conscience and not be forced to do things that are inconsistent with their conscience.
Yeah.
And that is an improvement, but you're right. You just noted the Supreme Court case that has settled this issue, at least for the time being. And again, there's the at least for this time being. Having a state statute is always more enduring than depending on the moods of whatever the current court majority is. So it would always be stronger and better if there was something explicitly, especially when we're dealing with federal constitutional protections, which the courts sometimes their interpretations of that change. But if you had something in state statute that said we don't force therapists to say things they don't believe, or say things they don't believe, then great. That's what they would like to see. I think that would be an improvement.
Our organization has taken an interest in this situation with counselors being able to practice according to their conviction. We filed an amicus brief in the Childs versus Salazar case, and we argued for the counselor's right to work according to his or her personal convictions, and also noted that there is an inherently religious nature of counseling. There's always meaning behind it.
Correct. Correct. And so this is, I think this is an opportunity for the state legislature to, reassert something that the Supreme Court currently is always doing, but we know that changes. Let's talk about the next one. Protections for houses of worship against forced closure.
Let's take a little trip back to 2020, Joseph.
Lord willing, we never confront this again, but history, suggests that there will be another time where the government thinks there is an emergency and a reason to tell churches you may not gather. And many states, in response to the fever dream of COVID, have explicitly written into their state statutes that the government cannot tell churches you cannot meet. And that would be good. Now, in theory, I can imagine a moment in the future where there is a health outbreak that does reasonably justify, people not gathering together because plagues happen and health outbreaks happen. But I think that is something that free people should be able to decide for themselves. And the precedent of government saying it's illegal for you to gather as a church is a huge problem. Again, there's never solutions, only trade-offs. So there's always risk associated with whatever choice we make there. But the choice of a government that can tell a church you cannot, the risks of having a government that can tell a church you cannot meet are greater than the risks of having a society where people are free to get together and sometimes transmit a disease, in my judgment.
Well, North Carolina has a little history with this. In 2020, May of 2020, U.S. District Court Judge James Dever blocked then Governor Roy Cooper's Executive Order 138, which capped indoor worship at 10 people, while airports, transit stations, medical facilities, libraries, and shopping centers faced no such limit as long as they followed social distancing guidelines. So the judge blocking this executive order was the result of a lawsuit that was filed by several churches claiming that the executive order violated their First Amendment rights by holding religious gatherings to stricter standards than secular ones. Exceeding the cap for worship carried potential criminal penalties. And while an exception existed for when outdoor worship was impossible, the ruling noted this standard was vague and didn't apply to other gatherings. So we talked about...
Go ahead.
We talked about Roy Cooper, remember the church and football guy?
Right. Yeah. Shut down. I mean, in California, I think they actually explicitly exempted strip clubs, which was part of the outrage of that. Churches cannot gather, but you can get together in a strip club, which is just kind of on its face super offensive. I don't know that was done here, but the point remains, yes, it would be good to clarify in state statute that the government does not have the authority to tell people not to meet at church, to tell churches not to gather. But North Carolina does not have that. Other states do. I think it would improve our religious freedom climate and improve our rankings in this index if that happens. Let's talk to another one. Move on to another one. Clergy penitent privilege safeguards. Now, this one actually, I think, for me is really hard. This is one of the more challenging ones because there is no protection specifically for clergy penitent privilege. Now, what is clergy penitent privilege? Things like confession. You and I are Protestants, so this is less of a thing in the Protestant world. It's a really big thing in the Catholic world where confession happens. And when you are confessing sin, sometimes the sin that you are confessing is criminal.
Right.
And we also know that there are certain members of the public who are mandatory reporters. My wife is an educator. She is, by law, a mandatory reporter. If she comes upon information that she thinks reasonably would lead a reasonable person to believe that there is abuse happening, the law requires her to report that.
Otherwise, she could be charged.
And if she does not, and later it is discovered she knew and said nothing, she could actually be in trouble with the law. So those are mandatory reporting laws. And the interest in children being safe, of course, is as high as an interest gets, right? And so we understand why that happens. The question is, should this apply to clergy when, in the course of being clergy, taking confession, they learn about something like sex abuse, right? What should a priest do if somebody comes in and says, hey, I sexually abused my neighbor's child, and I want to be absolved of this sin? That's the question of should the law require that priest to be a mandatory reporter who has to then go to law enforcement and say, I learned about this crime, because that is it is a religious, obviously a very sacred religious activity and expression that deals with, from the Catholic perspective, the absolution of your sin or not, and the eternal state of your soul. And so these are big religious questions. But making sure that sex abusers are not just running around when somebody knows about it, we want them to be stopped. Ashley, thoughts?
I think this is deep, and it is really difficult because on the one hand, you don't want to put barriers up to confession and things that could have eternal implications on someone's soul. On the other hand, protecting children, especially protecting victims, but especially children, I think is a compelling interest. Is that the legal term?
It is a compelling governmental interest.
And
That's
so, right. I'm not sure I've resolved that in my mind. I see there is a lot of tension here, and I might disagree a little bit with what you said about this being more relevant in the Catholic Church. I think it's actually equally relevant in the Protestant Church because you have church counseling situations and pastoral counseling and things like that. I think even Protestant pastors end up with a whole lot of information.
Yeah, you learned for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a difficult, if a priest or a pastor wanted to disclose information to law enforcement, they can still do that if their conscience binds them to do that. It's
Right.
just that they're not required to right now. Is that?
No, well, they cannot.
Oh, they cannot.
Under the religious conviction, under the religious instructions, it's excommunication if the priest violates that barrier.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
That's the issue. Is they are doctrinally and traditionally and religiously forbidden from
communicate that information to law
because it is
enforcement.
the confessional
in the Catholic
is
Church?
absolutely sacred. That's right.
Yeah.
That's
a tough
the challenge.
one. That's a really tough one.
But that sex abuse issues within the church aside, most people within these religious institutions are still people of goodwill. They're not trying to take advantage of people. No. They understand we do not want sex abuse happening.
Right.
But they are also bound by a religious vow not to disclose the things that they learn. And so should the government have an ability to punish a priest who fulfills their religious vows in that way?
It's difficult.
That is a difficult question, and I will say Washington State has been dealing with this issue recently. They passed a law requiring the priest to make that confession. The Catholic Church sued, and they ultimately settled, and the state has agreed not to enforce that on religious freedom grounds because it created a standard for them that didn't necessarily apply to everybody else, and so it was an unequal application of the law. But it's a tough legal question because there's two really, really compelling interests, it seems: religious freedom and the protection of children, and certainly protection of children from sexual abuse that sometimes seem to be in conflict. And those are the hard choices that you have to make in law. And again, there's no solutions, only trade-offs. Everything has challenges. Let's talk about a couple more of these real quickly. Protections against religious discrimination in financial services. This is language that many states have drafted, put into state statute that prevents banks, payment processors, and other financial institutions from denying or cutting off services to a customer because of their religious beliefs. In recent years, at kind of the height of cancel culture, fortunately this is receding a bit, but we've seen many institutions say, hey, we will not... you cannot bank with us anymore because we don't like your beliefs about marriage and gender. And those kind of things have happened. And it would be good to have something in state statute that specifically prevents financial institutions from doing that. We don't have that yet.
Yeah. That's important.
I will say on that subject, we've seen real progress kind of moving away from that. And our friends at the Alliance Defending Freedom have a corporate quality index, I think is what it's called. I'm forgetting the name at the moment, but it kind of ranks these financial institutions to make sure that they are treating people fairly and well and not discriminating against certain sectors of the
Debanking
society.
people for being Christians.
Right, debanking people. And I know lots of friends with organizations whose, payment process, CRM service provider, that's a constituent relationship management system. It's basically the back end of every organization, like a nonprofit, and you pay somebody to maintain your database and use their software. And a lot of those companies have gone to, Christian conservative organizations and said, we will not provide these services to you.
So it's actually happening.
Oh yeah, it's actually happening. I think it's now happening less than it was maybe 5 years ago, but it does happen. Should that be specifically protected? And then finally, protections against religious discrimination in foster parent eligibility. And this is something that feels a little personal because we've been working on this for the last couple of years.
You've been
in the state
working hard,
legislature.
yeah.
I have personally been working on this. But the issue is we've seen in a couple different states, lawsuits have arisen. Illinois, Washington, Oregon, some of these states where the state social service agencies or the state legislature themselves have created rules that say if you do not affirm that boys can become girls, you are ineligible to be foster parents. And what the religious liberty, First Liberty is saying through this index is that you should have a state statute that specifically says foster parents cannot be required to affirm a certain set of beliefs about gender in order to be foster parents. You can't discriminate against them based on their religious beliefs. We have not yet done that. We thought we have been close a couple of times recently, but interestingly, even our very Republican state legislature cannot get this through.
Well, it's important because a large portion of foster parents are Christians. It's been a big focus of multiple churches I've been a part of, is opening your home to children in need, whether it be through fostering or adoption. This is very much an area of Christian service that is near and dear to many of my friends' hearts. And so to think of them being essentially weeded out as potential foster parents because they cannot affirm that a boy can become a girl or the girl can become a boy, that's a real problem. I mean, that harms the children.
That's exactly right. And, that's James. Pure and undefiled religion before God is to take care of orphans and widows in their need.
That's right.
And a lot of Christians read that and say, I need to take care of orphans in need, and that's the foster care system. And that is the right thing to do. And
it's what God commands us to do.
Commands us to do, and the church needs to be the solution to that particular problem. And what this would say is that those who believe Orthodox Christian teaching about gender and sexuality and identity and all of those things are disqualified. Now, to be fair, I am not yet aware of of categorical class-based discrimination against Christians on this basis. The concern is there are agency rules that currently exist that if you have an activist social service worker, they could reasonably interpret this to mean Christians can't do this. And so there is some concern that it could happen, and if it did happen right now, no one would know. And it would be an improvement for the state legislature to officially say it is not abuse, it is not hateful to say boys can't become girls. And that would be an improvement, specifically protect or prohibit the state from discriminating on those grounds.
Yeah, we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
That's right. And so all of those things, I mean, when we stack it together like this, it looks like there's a lot that has not been done in North Carolina that has been done in other places. And if we did that, not only would it improve our ranking in this particular assessment, but it would have, in fact, much more importantly, protect religious freedom in a more enduring way in North Carolina. So we'll continue to track those subjects very quickly. But before we end our conversation today, Ashley, bet you didn't know. I'm going to make you guess something.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to go to a federal level real quickly here. And the Biden Department of Energy, there was a hearing in the U.S. Senate last week about the Energy Loan Program Office, the LPO, the Loan Program Office at the Department of Energy. And this is an office that has been giving grants and loans to energy companies. And it was created 15 years ago to stimulate, innovative, green, of course, energy programs that are going to help us do better, clean energy and save the planet. I assume that's kind of the premise. It's been around for 15 years. And in the first 15 years of its existence, it had committed $43 billion in loans or grants. That's how much they had dispensed.
Okay.
Now, the subject of the hearings that happened last week in Congress is the 76 days between Election Day, where Trump defeated Kamala Harris, and so the end of the Biden administration, and Inauguration Day. There's 76 days between Election Day and Trump's inauguration. How much money did the Loan Program Office dispense in those 76 days? Do you think? Take a guess.
You want me to guess?
Yeah, the history of this, $43 billion all time. How much did they do in those 76 days?
$10 billion.
That's wrong. A little higher.
$20 billion.
Higher.
30.
Higher.
$100 billion.
$96 billion. $96 billion.
Wow.
Went out the door in those 76 days.
76 days. Okay.
When they had dispensed $43 billion in the previous 15 years. And we're not going to go through every single one of these. There's a bunch of different companies. Some of them had very personal ties to LPO director Jigar Shah. Jigar is how his first name is pronounced. And so I'm going to go with Jigar, but I don't know that for sure. I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced. But Shah, S-H-A-A.
Say Director Shah.
Director Shah. He was the head of this. So $96 billion, and the concern is, and the subject of the hearings was this just people like looting the storehouses for their friends? Because a lot of these businesses had personal connections to the people in the office. Was this just, here's all our green companies, and the concerns that were expressed during that hearing is a lot of the business plans were undeveloped, totally theoretical. They were not subject to the same scrutiny that you would historically subject them to in order to make sure this is a viable business plan. Several of them are already in bankruptcy after receiving billions and billions of dollars. But it's an interesting thing to know.
That's a real problem for me, though, that several of these companies are already in bankruptcy after receiving billions and billions of dollars in taxpayer money as a loan that they're clearly never going to be able to pay back.
Because they're bankrupt, right?
That's horrible. I mean, this is why you have to go through this huge due diligence process to get any kind of a loan from the bank, because the bank doesn't want you to default and lose all that money. So, is the government doing that same due diligence? Do they have people that are capable of that?
Well, in that timeline,
who is doing this?
My kids would refer to that as sus. Which is an abbreviation for suspect for all of you old people who don't hang around Gen Zers. But yes, that's a fact. $96 billion. They're looking into it in Congress. And, it just feels like more self-dealing. But I don't know all of the facts yet. But yeah, it's sus.
Yeah.
Friends, thanks for joining us today on Politics for Happy People. That's the show we've got for you today. Quick reminder, new shows every Tuesday and Friday, so make sure you like and subscribe wherever you have found us so you don't miss the next one, and we will see you